The morning announcement echoed through the halls of the Galactic Military Academy like thunder. Students from dozens of different worlds stopped what they were doing to listen. The voice belonged to Commander Dong Min, a tall member of the Apex, species whose blue skin seemed to shimmer under the artificial lights. Attention, all students. Effective immediately, human participants are banned from the annual interspecies combat tournament. This decision comes from the High Council and is final. All registered human competitors must report to the administrative office by noon today. Tae-ho nearly choked on his breakfast. The tall Valdorian student had skin like rough stone and eyes that glowed red when he was excited. Right now, those eyes burned bright with amusement. He slammed his four-fingered hand on the metal table, causing his meal tray to jump. "Did you hear that?" he said loudly to anyone who would listen. "They banned the humans from fighting." His voice carried across the dining hall like a bark of laughter. Other students turned to look. Bo-Ra, whose crystal-like body caught the light and threw rainbows on the walls, tilted her head in confusion. Her species, the Lumens, were known for their logical thinking. This decision did not make sense to her. Why would they ban an entire species? She asked quietly. Tae-ho stood up, his massive frame towering over the other students at his table. "Because humans are weak," he declared. "They probably got hurt in practice and cried to their mothers." Laughter rippled through the dining hall. Students from the Kevak species, who looked like walking metal sculptures, clanged their eating utensils against their trays in approval. The Zentari students, with their long limbs and pale skin, nodded in agreement. Even some of the normally quiet, ethereal students seemed amused, though their translucent forms made it hard to tell. In the corner of the dining hall, Wu Jin sat alone. The human student was smaller than most others in his year, with short black hair and dark eyes that seemed older than his 20 years. He had been quietly eating his meal when the announcement came. Now he set down his fork and stared at his plate. Wu Jin had been looking forward to the tournament. He had trained for months, learning the combat styles of different species and practicing with various weapons. But he showed no anger at the news. Instead, he simply nodded to himself, as if he had expected this to happen. "Hey, human!" Tae-ho called across the hall. His voice was loud enough that everyone could hear. "How does it feel to be too weak to fight?" Wu Jin looked up. His face was calm, showing no emotion. "The decision has been made," he said simply. "I accept it." This response only made Tae-ho angrier. He wanted to see the human get upset, to prove that humans were emotional and weak. Instead, Wu Jin's quiet acceptance seemed almost dignified. "You accept it?" Tae-ho stomped across the dining hall, his heavy footsteps echoing off the walls. "Your entire species just got called too pathetic to compete, and you just accept it?" Wu Jin stood up slowly. Even at his full height, he only came up to Tae-ho's chest. "What would you have me do?" he asked. "Fight the decision? Prove your point about humans being emotional?" Bo-Ra watched this exchange with growing interest. There was something about the human's response that intrigued her. Most students would be angry or embarrassed, but Wu Jin seemed neither. He seemed, "Careful! I would have you show some pride," Tae-ho growled. "My species conquered 3 star systems before we learned to read. The Kevaks built war machines that could crack moons. The Zentari can move faster than most species can think. What have humans ever done except hide behind their precious rules and regulations?" "We follow orders," Wu Jin replied calmly. "We respect decisions made by those in authority." "Because you're weak!" Tae-ho's red eyes blazed brighter. "Because you know you would lose!" The dining hall had gone completely quiet now. Everyone was watching the confrontation. Some students had even stood up to get a better view. This was exactly the kind of entertainment they enjoyed between classes. Wu Jin picked up his tray and walked toward the cleaning station. As he passed Tae-ho, the huge Valdorian blocked his path. "Where are you going, little human? Are you running away?" "I am cleaning my tray and going to class," Wu Jin said. "Just as I do every day." "How boring," Tae-ho sneered. "No wonder they banned you. Who wants to watch humans do boring things?" Several students laughed at this. The sound filled the dining hall like the chattering of excited animals before a feeding. Hyun-soo, the Zentari instructor, had been watching from the doorway. His long, pale face showed concern as he stepped into the room. His species moved, with fluid grace, and he seemed to glide across the floor. "Students," he said, his voice carrying easily through the large space. "Return to your meals. Classes begin in 20 minutes. Taeho turned to face the instructor. "Instructor Hyun-soo, is it true? Are humans really banned because they are too weak?" Hyun-soo's expression grew uncomfortable. His large, dark eyes seemed to look everywhere except at the students. "The decision came from the High Council. I do not question their wisdom." "But why?" Bo-Ra asked. Her voice was musical, like crystal chimes in the wind. "What reason did they give?" "The official statement mentioned safety concerns and preventing unnecessary incidents," Hyun-soo replied carefully. Taeho laughed so hard his red eyes flickered like fire. "Safety concerns. They are worried the humans might get hurt." More laughter filled the room. Students began making jokes about humans needing protection from their own shadows. Someone suggested they should wear soft padding during regular classes to keep them safe. Through it all, Woo Jin continued cleaning his tray as if nothing was happening. He moved with careful, precise motions. Every action seemed planned and controlled. Bo-Ra noticed something else about the human student. While everyone else was laughing and joking, Woo Jin's eyes were alert. He was listening to everything, watching everyone. It was the look of someone who was paying very close attention. When Woo Jin finished cleaning his tray, he walked toward the exit. As he passed Bo-Ra's table, she spoke quietly. "Are you not angry about this?" she asked. Woo Jin paused and looked at her. For just a moment, something flickered in his dark eyes. It was gone so quickly that Bo-Ra almost thought she had imagined it. "Anger serves no purpose here," he said. "The decision is made." After he left, the dining hall slowly returned to normal. Students finished their meals and began heading to their first classes of the day. But the conversation continued. Everyone had an opinion about the human ban. "My cousin fought alongside human peacekeepers once," said a Kavak student. "He said they were adequate soldiers but nothing special." "I heard they have strange rules about fighting," added a Centauri. "They refuse to use certain weapons or tactics." "Probably because they are too scared," Taeho declared. "Real warriors use every advantage they can get." Bo-Ra listened to all this talk, but her mind kept returning to Woo Jin's reaction. Something about his calm acceptance bothered her. In her experience, when someone was truly weak, they either got angry when challenged or they showed fear. Woo Jin had shown neither. As she walked to her first class, Bo-Ra decided she wanted to know more about humans and their military history. Surely the Academy's database would have information about why an entire species had been banned from competition. What she would find in those files would change everything she thought she knew about the quiet human student and his supposedly weak species. The day continued as normal, but under the surface, questions were growing. Questions that would soon demand answers. 3 days had passed since the announcement, and the mockery had only gotten worse. Taeho seemed to make it his personal mission to remind everyone how weak humans were. During combat training, he would demonstrate moves and then say, "Too bad the humans cannot learn this. It might be too dangerous for them." Bo-Ra watched from across the training hall as Woo Jin practiced alone in the corner. The human moved through a series of exercises that she did not recognize. His movements were smooth and controlled, but there was something intense about the way he trained. He never seemed to rest, never seemed to get tired. "Look at him," Taeho said loudly, pointing at Woo Jin. "Still pretending to be a warrior, even though his own species has been declared unfit for combat." Several students laughed, but Bo-Ra noticed that Woo Jin did not stop his exercises. He did not even look in their aid direction. He simply continued his routine as if the taunts did not exist. After training, Bo-Ra went to the Academy Library. The massive building held information from thousands of worlds and millions of years of galactic history. Surely there would be something about human military capabilities. Jin-A, the ethereal librarian, floated behind the information desk. Her species had no solid form, appearing more like a collection of glowing mist shaped roughly like a person. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What are you looking for today, Bo-Ra?" Jin-A asked. "Human military history," Bo-Ra replied. I want to understand why they were banned from the tournament. Jin'e's form flickered, which was how ethereals showed surprise. That is an unusual request. Most students are satisfied with the official explanation. I am not most students, Bora said. My species values understanding over acceptance. Jin'e drifted away from the desk and gestured for Bora to follow. They moved through rows of data terminals and information crystals until they reached a section Bora had never seen before. Human military records are complicated, Jin'e said carefully. Much of their recent history is classified above student level. What about older records? Bora asked. Surely their ancient history is available. Jin'e's form pulsed thoughtfully. Some information exists, but I must warn you, what you find might not match what you expect. The ethereal librarian activated a data terminal and began searching through files. After several minutes, she found something. Here, Jin'e said, basic information about human conflict history, but notice how many files are marked as restricted. Bora looked at the screen. There were thousands of entries, but most showed red warning symbols indicating classified material. The files that were available had strange titles that made no sense to her. What are the Geneva Conventions? She asked, pointing at one entry. Rules of war that humans created for themselves, Jin'e replied. Though the full document is restricted, I can tell you they are guidelines about how conflicts should be conducted. Bora found this puzzling. Rules for war? Why would a species limit how they fight? That information is classified, Jin'e said. But I can show you some basic battle statistics. The librarian opened a file containing numbers and dates. Bora studied the information, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. According to the records, humans had been involved in hundreds of conflicts throughout their history. But the casualty numbers seemed wrong. This cannot be accurate, Bora said, pointing at the screen. It says here that humans often continued, fighting even when they had lost more soldiers than they started with. The numbers are correct, Jin'e replied quietly. Humans have a unique approach to warfare. Bora scrolled through more files, growing more confused with each entry. There were references to something called total war and mentions of humans fighting for years without surrendering, even when facing impossible odds. Why is so much of this classified? Bora asked. Jin'e's form dimmed, which was how ethereals showed discomfort. Because the High Council believes that detailed human military history might cause instability among other species. Before Bora could ask more questions, she heard familiar voices approaching. Taeho and several other students were entering the library, talking loudly despite the rules about quiet study. I bet the human records are full of defeats, Taeho was saying. That is probably why they hide them. Bora quickly closed the files. She had been reading and moved to a different section of the library. She did not want Taeho to know what she was researching. The group of students settled at a nearby table, still talking about the human ban. My instructor said humans have rules about not hurting civilians, said a KVAC student. How can you win a war if you protect your enemies? Exactly, Taeho agreed. Real warriors do whatever it takes to achieve victory. Humans are too soft to understand this. Bora listened while pretending to study star charts. The more she heard, the more questions she had. If humans were so weak and had so many rules limiting their fighting, how had they survived long enough to join the Galactic Council? That evening, Bora returned to her dormitory with more questions than answers. Her roommate, a quiet Centauri named Mi-young, was studying at her desk. You look troubled, Mi-young observed. Her species was known for reading emotions in others. I have been researching human military history, Bora admitted. Nothing makes sense. Mi-young set down her study materials. What do you mean? The official story is that humans are too weak for combat, but their historical records suggest something different. They have fought more wars than most species, often against impossible odds, and somehow they survived. Maybe they were lucky, Mi-young suggested. Bora shook her head. Luck does not last for thousands of years. There must be something else. The next day, Bora decided to observe Wu Jin more carefully. During classes, she noticed things she had missed before. The human student never seemed distracted, never seemed to daydream like other students. He paid attention to everything with an intensity that was almost unsettling. During combat theory class, Instructor Hyun-soo was teaching about tactical retreats. Sometimes the wisest action is to withdraw and fight another day, the instructor explained. Preserving your forces is more important than winning a single battle. Most students nodded in understanding. This was basic military strategy. But Bo-ra saw Woo Jin's expression change slightly. It was subtle. But there was something in his eyes that looked almost disappointed. After class, she approached him. "You disagreed with the instructor," she said. Woo Jin looked at her carefully before answering. "I did not say anything." "Your expression said enough. You do not believe in tactical retreats." Woo Jin was quiet for a long moment. "My people have different ideas about when retreat is acceptable," he said finally. "What kind of different ideas?" But Woo Jin had already started walking away. "I should not discuss military philosophy," he called over his shoulder. "It might violate the Academy's new policies." That afternoon, Tae-ho and his friends decided to escalate their harassment. They cornered Woo Jin in the equipment room after training. "We have been thinking," Tae-ho announced. "Since you cannot compete in the tournament, maybe you should prove you deserve to be here some other way." Woo Jin continued putting away his training gear. "How do you suggest I do that?" "Arm wrestling," said a HFY student. "If you are really a warrior, you should be able to beat at least one of us." "The Academy has rules against unsanctioned competition between species," Woo Jin replied calmly. "Are you hiding behind rules now?" Tae-ho taunted. "How convenient for you." Bo-ra, who had followed them to return her own equipment, watched the confrontation unfold. She expected Woo Jin to get angry or to accept the challenge to prove himself. Instead, he did something unexpected. "You are correct," Woo Jin said. "I am following the rules, just as I followed the rules about the tournament ban." Something in his tone made everyone pause. There was no fear in his voice, no shame. If anything, he sounded patient. "Rules exist for good reasons," Woo Jin continued. "Sometimes those reasons are not obvious until it is too late to change course." Tae-ho's red eyes flared with frustration. "You talk like a philosopher, not a soldier." "Perhaps," Woo Jin agreed. "But philosophers sometimes understand things that soldiers do not." After the human left, the other students stood in confused silence. Tae-ho looked particularly frustrated. "He acts like he is hiding something," the Valdorian muttered. Bo-ra realized that Tae-ho was right, but probably not in the way he meant. Woo Jin was definitely hiding something. The question was what and why. That night, Bo-ra made a decision. She would find out the truth about human military capability, even if it meant accessing restricted files. Whatever the High Council was hiding, she was determined to discover it. Little did she know that her curiosity would soon lead to revelations that would change how everyone at the Academy viewed the quiet human student and his supposedly peaceful species. Bo-ra spent the next week trying to access more human military files, but every attempt led to the same result: classified, restricted, or completely missing data. The few files she could open only raised more questions. References to something called rules of engagement appeared repeatedly, along with mentions of proportional response and collateral damage limitations. Meanwhile, Tae-ho's campaign against Woo Jin had grown into something larger. The Valdorian student had convinced others that the human ban was unfair discrimination against alien species. His logic was twisted but effective. If humans were allowed to attend the Academy, but banned from competition, it suggested that other species were somehow being cheated of the chance to prove their superiority. "Think about it," Tae-ho argued during lunch. "We train alongside this human every day. We learn the same combat techniques, study the same strategies. But when it comes time to prove our skills, he gets special protection. How is that fair to us?" A HFY student named Sung-ho nodded vigorously. His metallic face could not show expression, but his voice carried clear frustration. "My species has waited 3 years for the chance to demonstrate our combat superiority. Now we are told we cannot face all opponents." "Exactly." Tae-ho slammed his fist on the table. "They are denying us the right to complete victory." Bo-ra listened to these arguments with growing unease. Something about the way Tae-ho talked bothered her, though she could not put her finger on what it was. He spoke about fighting humans as if it would be entertaining, like watching a sporting event rather than serious combat training. By the end of the week, Tai Ho had gathered signatures from over 200 students. His petition demanded that the human ban be lifted, arguing that it violated the Academy's principles of equal competition and fair assessment. Wu Jin seemed completely unaware of the petition drive happening around him. He continued his daily routine, attending classes, training alone, eating quietly in the dining hall. The only change Bo-Ra noticed was that he had started staying in the training room later each evening, working on exercises that became increasingly intense. On Friday morning, Commander Dong-min called another academy-wide assembly. His blue skin seemed darker than usual, and his normally confident posture appeared strained. "Students," he began, his voice echoing through the packed auditorium, "I have received your petition regarding the human tournament ban. After consulting with the High Council, they have agreed to reconsider the restriction." Excited murmurs filled the auditorium. Tae-ho grinned widely, showing teeth that were sharp enough to cut metal. But Commander Dong-min raised his hand for silence, and his expression remained troubled. "However, there are conditions that must be met before any change in policy can be implemented." The excited chatter died down. Students leaned forward in their seats, waiting to hear what these conditions might be. First, all students who signed the petition must attend a mandatory educational presentation about human military history. This presentation will be held tomorrow evening in the main auditorium. Several students groaned. Educational presentations were usually boring reviews of ancient battles that had no relevance to modern warfare. Second, the commander continued, after viewing this presentation, you will have the opportunity to withdraw your signatures from the petition. Those who maintain their support after the presentation will be eligible to participate in exhibition matches with human opponents. Tae-ho stood up, his massive frame towering over the other students around him. "Commander, with respect, why do we need to watch old battle recordings? We already know that humans are inferior fighters. We just want the chance to prove it fairly." Commander Dong-min's expression grew even more uncomfortable. "The High Council insists that informed consent requires full understanding of what you are requesting. The presentation is not optional for petition signers." After the assembly, students gathered in small groups to discuss this development. Most were pleased that their petition had been successful, even if they had to sit through a boring presentation first. "It is probably just propaganda," Tae-ho declared to his followers. "They will show us videos of humans winning small battles against primitive opponents and try to make them look impressive." Sung-ho, the Kevak student, agreed. "My species conquered entire star systems using superior technology and tactics. No amount of propaganda can change the fact that humans are physically and strategically inferior." Bo-Ra found herself in an unusual position. Part of her wanted to see the presentation, because it might finally answer her questions about human military capabilities. But another part of her was beginning to suspect that there was more to this situation than anyone realized. That evening, she encountered Wu Jin in the library. The human was sitting alone at a corner table, reading what appeared to be a philosophy text rather than a military manual. "Are you not concerned about tomorrow's presentation?" she asked, sitting down across from him. Wu Jin looked up from his book. "Should I be? Your classmates are going to see your species' military history. Some of them seem eager to find reasons to mock human capabilities further." Wu Jin closed his book and studied her face carefully. "And what do you think they will find?" Bo-Ra realized she did not know how to answer that question. "I have been trying to research human military records myself. Most of the information is classified." "There are good reasons for that," Wu Jin said quietly. "What kind of reasons?" Wu Jin was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes knowledge changes how people see the world. Once you know certain things, you cannot unknow them. Is that why you have not protested the tournament ban? Because you know something the others do not?" Wu Jin picked up his book and stood to leave. "I follow orders and respect decisions made by those with greater wisdom than myself. Tomorrow, your classmates will have the chance to understand why that is important." As he walked away, Bo-Ra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the library's temperature control. Something in Wu Jin's tone suggested that tomorrow's presentation would not be the boring propaganda session that Tae-ho expected. The next day, rumors spread throughout the academy about what the presentation might contain. Some students claimed it would show human victories against weak opponents. Others suggested it would demonstrate advanced human technology that was being kept secret. Tae-ho spent the day making jokes about what they might see. "Maybe they will show us humans running away really fast," he said during combat training. "That could be considered a military skill." His followers laughed, but Bo-Ra noticed that instructor Hyunsu did not join in the humor. If anything, the Zentauri looked increasingly worried as the day progressed. An hour before the presentation was scheduled to begin, Bo-Ra went looking for Wu Jin. She found him in his dormitory room, sitting quietly on his bed with his eyes closed. He appeared to be meditating, but there was a tension in his posture that she had not seen before. "Are you not coming to the presentation?" she asked. Wu Jin opened his eyes. "I have filed a medical excuse. The academy physician has excused me due to illness." Bo-Ra could see that he was not sick. "You do not want to watch your own species." "Military history?" "I have lived with that history my entire life," Wu Jin replied. "I do not need to watch it again." There was something in his voice that made Bo-Ra's crystal form resonate with unease. She had never heard him sound sad before, but that was the only word that fit his tone. As she left his room and headed toward the auditorium, Bo-Ra realized that her research had been approaching the problem from the wrong direction. She had been trying to find out what humans could do in war. But maybe the real question was what they had done, and why they seemed to carry the weight of that knowledge so heavily. The auditorium was packed with students eager to see what all the fuss was about. Commander Dongmin stood at the front, along with several other instructors that Bo-Ra had never seen before. All of them looked uncomfortable. As the lights dimmed and the presentation equipment activated, Bo-Ra had the distinct feeling that she was about to learn something that would change everything she thought she knew about the quiet human student and his mysterious species. What she did not expect was that the knowledge would haunt her dreams for years to come. The auditorium fell silent as the massive display screen flickered to life. Commander Dongmin stood at the podium, his blue skin seeming paler than usual under the bright lights. "Before we begin," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the packed hall, "I want to remind you that you requested this presentation. What you are about to see is authentic footage from human military conflicts throughout their history." Tae-ho sat in the front row with his arms crossed, a smug expression on his stone-like face. Around him, other students chatted quietly among themselves, treating this like entertainment before a meal. "Let us start with some basic footage," Commander Dongmin said, gesturing to the screen. The first images showed clean, organized military formations. Human soldiers in neat uniforms marched in straight lines across open fields. Their weapons looked primitive compared to modern galactic standards: metal projectile throwers instead of energy weapons, ground vehicles with wheels instead of hover technology. "Look at that equipment," Sung-ho whispered to his Kivac friends. "My ancestors had better technology 3,000 years ago." More laughter rippled through the audience as they watched humans practicing basic combat drills. The movements looked slow and clumsy compared to the fluid grace of Zentauri combat forms or the devastating power of Valdorian battle techniques. "This is their advanced training?" Tae-ho called out, not bothering to keep his voice down. "No. Wonder they need protection from real combat." The footage continued showing sanitized military exercises. Humans crawling under obstacles, climbing over walls, running in formation. Everything looked ordinary, even boring. Several students began checking their personal communication devices, already losing interest. Bo-Ra, however, noticed something the others missed. In every clip, no matter how routine the exercise, the humans' faces showed the same expression: complete focus. They were not just going through the motions. Every movement, every step, every gesture was performed with total concentration. "Now," Commander Dongmin said, and his voice carried a weight that made several students look up from their devices. "We will move to footage from actual combat situations. I must warn you that what you are about to see may be disturbing." Tae-ho laughed out loud. "Disturbing? We have studied the military histories of dozens of species. We know what war looks like. The screen changed. Gone were the clean uniforms and organized formations. Instead, the students saw something completely different. The first real combat footage showed humans in what looked like deep ditches carved into muddy ground. Their uniforms were torn and dirty. Their faces were covered with mud and what might have been blood. Rain was falling, turning everything into a brown mess. This is from one of their early planetary conflicts, Commander Dongmin explained. What you are seeing are called trenches. The humans in the footage were not marching in neat lines anymore. They were crawling through mud, dragging equipment that seemed too heavy for their small frames. Explosions in the distance sent dirt and debris flying through the air. "Primitive warfare," a Centauri student commented. "My species learned to avoid ground combat centuries ago." But as the footage continued, something began to bother the watching students. The explosions were getting closer to the human positions. Any reasonable military force would have retreated to safer ground. Instead, the humans dug their trenches deeper and stayed where they were. "Why do they not withdraw?" Bora asked, though she was not sure if she was speaking to anyone in particular. On screen, a human soldier was hit by debris from an explosion. The projectile tore through his leg, leaving a wound that would have incapacitated most species. But instead of falling down or calling for medical assistance, the human used his weapon as a walking stick and continued moving toward his objective. The chattering in the auditorium began to quiet down. Students were starting to pay attention to what they were seeing. "This cannot be normal behavior," Mi Young whispered to Bora. "He should have collapsed from that injury." The footage showed more scenes from the same conflict. Humans fighting, in conditions that would have been considered impossible by galactic military standards. They had been in those muddy trenches for weeks, according to the timestamp on the recordings. Weeks without proper shelter, under constant attack, with inadequate food and medical supplies. Any other species would have negotiated a withdrawal or surrendered to preserve their forces. But the humans stayed. And more than that, they kept, fighting as if the outcome of the entire war depended on holding that small piece of muddy ground. "I do not understand their strategy," Sung Ho said, his metallic voice carrying confusion rather than mockery now. "What are they trying to accomplish?" Commander Dongmin paused the footage. "That is an excellent question. Human military strategy often appears illogical to other species because it is based on different assumptions about acceptable losses and necessary sacrifice." "What kind of assumptions?" Taeho demanded. His red eyes were no longer glowing with amusement. They had dimmed to a dull orange that indicated confusion or concern. Instead of answering directly, Commander Dongmin started the footage again. This time it showed a different battle, but the same disturbing pattern emerged. Humans fighting long past the point where withdrawal would have been logical. Soldiers continuing to advance even when wounded. Entire units refusing to retreat, even when facing impossible odds. In one particularly unsettling clip, a human soldier was shown carrying a wounded comrade across an open battlefield while explosions erupted around them. The carrying soldier was hit multiple times, but did not drop his burden. He kept moving towards safety until he collapsed from his own injuries, still holding on to the wounded soldier. "This makes no tactical sense," a KVAC student said quietly. "He could have moved faster and survived if he had left the wounded soldier behind." But he did not, Bora observed. Even when it meant his own death, he did not abandon his comrade. The auditorium had grown completely silent now. Even Taeho had stopped making comments. The students were beginning to realize that what they were watching was not weakness or poor military training. It was something else entirely. The footage shifted to show a different type of battle. This time, human soldiers were defending a position that was clearly going to be overrun. Enemy forces outnumbered them by at least 10 to 1. Any reasonable commander would have ordered a retreat to preserve the fighting force. But the humans did not retreat. They stayed at their positions and continued fighting until the very end. And even when their position was overrun, soldiers kept fighting with whatever weapons they could find, even using their bare hands when nothing else was available. "They fought until they died," Mi Young whispered. "All of them. Not one of them tried to escape or surrender." Commander Dongmin stopped the footage again. The silence in the auditorium was now complete. No one was checking their communication devices. No one was making jokes. Every student was staring at the screen with expressions ranging from confusion to growing unease. "What you have just witnessed," the commander said slowly, "represents the fundamental challenge that human military capability presents to galactic strategic thinking. Humans do not fight to achieve tactical objectives or to minimize casualties. They fight as if losing means the extinction of everything they value." Tejo finally spoke, but his voice lacked its usual arrogance. That is not normal behavior for a military force." "No," Commander Dongmin agreed. "It is not. And what you have seen so far represents some of the less intense examples of human military conduct." A chill ran through the auditorium. Less intense? What they had just watched showed soldiers fighting to the death rather than retreating, wounded fighters continuing to advance, and military units that refused to surrender even when facing certain destruction. Bo-Ra felt her crystal form resonating with an emotion she could not quite identify. It was not fear, exactly, but it was something close to it. She was beginning to understand why human military records were classified and why Wu Jin had chosen not to attend this presentation. "There is more footage," Commander Dongmin continued, "but before we proceed, I want to give anyone who wishes to leave the opportunity to do so. What comes next may challenge your understanding of what civilized warfare means." Not a single student moved. They sat frozen in their seats, transfixed by what they had already seen, and terrified to discover what could possibly be worse. The screen flickered back to life, and Bo-Ra realized that their education about human military capability was just beginning. The new footage began with what looked like a peaceful scene. Human soldiers were resting in what appeared to be a temporary camp. Some were eating, others were cleaning their equipment. They looked tired but not particularly threatening. "This is footage from a conflict that lasted 4 years, Commander Dongmin explained. "What you are seeing is the beginning of the 3rd year." Tejo leaned forward in his seat. 4 years. What kind of military objective takes 4 years to achieve? "Survival," the commander replied simply. The peaceful scene on the screen suddenly changed. Explosions erupted throughout the human camp. Enemy forces appeared from multiple directions, completely surrounding the human position. It was clearly a carefully planned attack designed to eliminate the entire human force. But something unexpected happened. Instead of panicking or attempting to flee, the human soldiers immediately began organizing a defense. They had no time to plan, no opportunity to call for reinforcement, and no hope of escape. Yet they responded to the surprise attack as if they had been preparing for this exact moment their entire lives. "Look at their response time," Bo-Ra whispered to Mi-young. "From surprise attack to organized defense in less than 30 seconds. What was even more disturbing was how efficiently the humans adapted to the situation. When their communication equipment was destroyed, they used hand signals. When they ran out of ammunition for their weapons, they began using improvised explosives. When those ran out, they started using tools and equipment as weapons. The footage showed one human soldier who had lost his primary weapon. Instead of retreating or surrendering, he picked up a piece of broken metal and continued fighting with it. When that broke, he used a cooking pot. When the pot was destroyed, he fought with his bare hands. This is not military training, Sung Ho said, his metallic voice carrying a note of disbelief. This is something else. The battle continued for hours. The humans were vastly outnumbered and completely surrounded. They had no hope of victory and no possibility of escape. Yet they kept fighting, and more than that, they kept adapting their tactics in real time. When the enemy forces tried to break through on the left side of the human position, the humans immediately shifted their strongest fighters to that area. When the attack moved to the right side, they redeployed again. It was like watching a single organism respond to threats, rather than individual soldiers following orders. "Where is their command structure?" a Centauri student asked. "Who is giving them orders?" Commander Dongmin paused the footage. "That is one of the most disturbing aspects of human military behavior. When their formal command structure is destroyed, they automatically reorganize themselves. Every human soldier is trained to assume command if necessary, and to follow whoever demonstrates the most effective leadership." The footage resumed, and the students watched something that defied everything they had learned about military science. The humans had been fighting for 6 hours straight. They had taken casualties that should have broken their ability to function as a fighting force. Many of their soldiers were wounded, some severely. But instead of deteriorating, their performance seemed to improve as the battle continued. They began anticipating enemy attacks before they happened. They started coordinating complex maneuvers without any apparent communication. They fought as if the longer the battle lasted, the stronger they became. How is this possible? Tae-ho asked, and for the first time since Bo-Ra had known him, his voice carried no arrogance. They should be exhausted. They should be broken. On screen, a human soldier who had been wounded in the leg was shown continuing to fight from a sitting position. When his leg wound made it impossible for him to move, he positioned himself to guard the medical station where other wounded soldiers were being treated. He stayed at that position for 3 more hours, fighting off multiple attacks despite his injury. Another scene showed a human soldier who had run out of ammunition. Instead of falling back to get more supplies, he began collecting weapons from fallen enemies. When he could not figure out how to use the alien weapons, he started throwing them at attacking forces like improvised projectiles. But the most disturbing footage showed what happened when individual humans were separated from their unit. Other species, when isolated in combat, would typically try to hide until they could rejoin their forces or surrender if capture seemed inevitable. The isolated humans did something completely different. They began hunting the enemy forces on their own. Cut off from support, outnumbered, and operating alone, they became more dangerous rather than less. They used the terrain to their advantage, set traps, and conducted individual warfare campaigns that disrupted entire enemy operations. This one soldier, Commander Dongmin pointed to a figure on the screen, operated alone behind enemy lines for 2 weeks. He disrupted supply lines, gathered intelligence, and eliminated high-value targets. When he was finally cornered by overwhelming forces, he chose to detonate his remaining explosives rather than be captured. The silence in the auditorium was now absolute. Students who had been joking about human weakness an hour ago sat transfixed by footage that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. The screen showed more battles, more conflicts, more examples of the same terrifying pattern. Humans who fought long past the point where other species would have surrendered. Soldiers who continued advancing while wounded in ways that should have been fatal. Military units that refused to break no matter how hopeless their situation became. In one particularly unsettling sequence, the footage showed a human medical unit, soldiers whose job was to heal rather than fight. When their position was overrun by enemy forces, these medical soldiers did something that shocked even the experienced military instructors watching in the auditorium. They continued treating wounded soldiers while under direct fire. They ran into active combat zones to retrieve injured comrades. They established field hospitals in positions that were constantly under attack, and they never stopped working to save lives even when their own lives were in immediate danger. Medical personnel are protected by galactic law, a student called out. They should not be fighting at all. Human medical personnel carry weapons, Commander Dongmin replied. But they only use them to protect their patients. They will fight to the death to defend wounded soldiers, but they will also risk their lives to save wounded enemies. The footage proved this statement. In one clip, a human medic was shown treating a wounded alien soldier while explosions erupted around them. The medic's own forces were retreating, but he stayed with the wounded enemy until he could get the alien to safety. Why? Bo-Ra asked, though she was not sure if the question was directed at the screen or at the universe in general. Why would they risk their lives for their enemies? Because, Commander Dongmin said quietly, humans have rules about warfare that they enforce on themselves more strictly than any outside authority ever could. They call them the Geneva Conventions, and they represent humanity's attempt to remain civilized even during the most uncivilized activity possible. The footage continued showing battle after battle, conflict after conflict, all demonstrating the same impossible pattern. Humans fighting as if surrender was not an option. Soldiers continuing to advance despite wounds that would have killed most other species. Military units that somehow became more effective as their situation became more hopeless. But the most disturbing realization was beginning to dawn on the watching students. This was not footage from humanity's ancient history. The timestamp showed that these battles had taken place within the last 50 years. Some of the equipment visible in the recordings was more advanced than what the Academy used for training. "These are recent conflicts," Mi Young whispered. "They still fight like this." Taeho had not spoken for over an hour. His red eyes had dimmed to almost nothing, and his stone-like face showed an expression that Bo-Ra had never seen before. It might have been fear, or it might have been respect. Possibly both. The footage finally ended, but the silence in the auditorium continued. 200 students sat in their seats, staring at a blank screen, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Bo-Ra realized that her week of research had been focused on the wrong question entirely. She had been trying to understand what humans could do in warfare. But the real question was what they would do, and how far they were willing to go to achieve their objectives. The answer was simple and terrifying. There was no limit. Commander Dongmin stepped back to the podium, and his expression carried a weight that seemed to press down on everyone in the room. "Now you understand why humans are banned from combat competition," he said. "It is not because they are weak, it is because they do not understand the concept of acceptable losses or reasonable limits. When humans fight, they fight as if losing means the end of everything they care about." The implications of this statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Every student in the auditorium was beginning to realize that they had completely misunderstood the nature of the quiet human student who trained alone in their academy. But the presentation was not over. Commander Dongmin had one more revelation. That would change everything they thought they knew about warfare, civilization, and the species they shared the galaxy with. Commander Dongmin stood at the podium, studying the faces of students who had entered the auditorium laughing and joking, but now sat in stunned silence. The weight of what they had witnessed seemed to press down on the entire room like a physical force. "I can see that you are beginning to understand," he said quietly. "But there is one more aspect of human military behavior that you need to comprehend before you can truly grasp why the ban exists." The screen flickered to life again, but this time it showed something different. Instead of combat footage, students saw what appeared to be a peaceful planet, with cities intact and populations going about their normal lives. "This planet was involved in a territorial dispute 3 years ago," Commander Dongmin explained. "The human peacekeeping force was deployed to protect civilian populations while diplomatic solutions were negotiated." Taeho found his voice for the first time in an hour. "Peacekeeping? You mean they were not even fighting for themselves?" "No. They were protecting alien civilians from other alien military forces. The humans had no territorial claims on this world and no strategic interest in the outcome of the dispute. The footage showed human soldiers establishing protective perimeters around cities and refugee camps. Their equipment was clearly marked with medical and humanitarian symbols. These were not combat troops. They were supposed to be neutral protectors. "Watch what happens when the situation deteriorates," Commander Dongmin said. The peaceful scene began to change. Military forces from 2 different alien species began converging on the cities where human peacekeepers were stationed. It quickly became clear that both sides intended to fight through the civilian areas, using the cities as battlegrounds. The human response was immediate and decisive. Instead of withdrawing to avoid being caught in the crossfire, they expanded their protective perimeters. They positioned themselves directly between the approaching armies and the civilian populations. "This is suicide," Sung-Ho whispered. "They are outnumbered 50 to 1 on each side, but the humans did not seem to care about the odds. They began establishing defensive positions that made it impossible for either army to reach the civilians without going through the human peacekeepers first. When the alien armies demanded that the humans withdraw, the human commander's response was broadcast on all frequencies. "Negative. We are here to protect civilians. If you want to fight each other, you will have to do it somewhere else." The alien commanders tried negotiating. They offered the humans safe passage if they would simply move aside. They promised that civilian casualties would be minimized. They even threatened to destroy the human force entirely if they did not withdraw. The human response never changed. "Negative. We are here to protect civilians." What followed was one of the most disturbing battles the students had ever witnessed. Two alien armies, each vastly superior to the human peacekeeping force, found themselves unable to achieve their military objectives because a small group of humans simply refused to move. The humans did not attack either army. They maintained purely defensive positions. But those defensive positions were so strategically placed and so stubbornly held that neither alien force could accomplish anything without first destroying the human peacekeepers. They are using themselves as human shields, Bora realized. But they are not protecting themselves. They are protecting the civilians. The battle lasted for 6 days. The alien armies tried everything: direct assault, siege tactics, negotiation, threats, bribery. Nothing worked. The humans absorbed casualties that should have broken any military unit, but they never wavered from their positions. On the 3rd day, the human peacekeeping force had taken 70% casualties. Most of their heavy equipment was destroyed. Their supply lines were cut. Any other military force would have been combat ineffective, but the humans adapted. Wounded soldiers who could not fight took over support roles. Medical personnel established aid stations in the most protected areas and continued treating both their own wounded and injured civilians. Engineers used destroyed equipment to build better defensive positions. They are getting stronger, Mi Young observed, her voice filled with disbelief. The more damage they take, the more effective they become. On the 4th day, something extraordinary happened. The alien armies began taking casualties not from human weapons, but from each other. In their efforts to eliminate the human peacekeepers, they had been forced to deploy in ways that exposed them to attack from their opponents. The humans had done something that military academies throughout the galaxy considered impossible. They had used purely defensive tactics to turn two superior forces against each other. By the 6th day, both alien armies had suffered such heavy losses that they agreed to cease hostilities and accept diplomatic mediation. The human peacekeeping force had accomplished their mission despite being outnumbered, outgunned, and given no support from their home government. The final casualty count, Commander Dongmin announced, was 837 human, soldiers killed or wounded out of a force of 1,000. Civilian casualties, 0. The auditorium remained silent. But now the silence carried a different quality. It was not the stunned quiet of students trying to process surprising information. It was the heavy silence of people confronting a truth they were not prepared to understand. The screen changed again, showing more recent footage. This time it displayed human soldiers in a different type of conflict, one where they were fighting to evacuate alien civilians from a natural disaster. The humans worked for 72 hours straight without rest, carrying alien civilians to safety through terrain that was actively collapsing around them. When their evacuation vehicles were destroyed, they carried people on their backs. When the safe routes were blocked, they found new ones. When there were not enough humans to carry all the civilians, they went back for more trips. 3 human soldiers died in that evacuation, Commander Dongmin said. They died because they refused to leave behind civilians who were too injured to walk. Those soldiers could have saved themselves, but they chose to stay with alien children who were not even their own species. At this point, a door at the back of the auditorium opened. A figure entered quietly and made his way to the front of the room. It was a human, but not Wu Jin. This human was older, with gray hair and scars that spoke of extensive combat experience. "Students," Commander Dongmin said, "I would like you to meet Young Sik, a human military historian who has agreed to help explain what you have witnessed." Young Sik stepped up to the podium. His presence seemed to fill the entire auditorium, despite the fact that he was smaller than most of the alien students. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had lived through the experiences shown in the footage. "You have been watching recordings of human military actions," he began, "but I suspect you are confused about what you have seen. You expected to find evidence of weakness, but instead you have found something that disturbs you." Taeho finally found the courage to ask the question that was haunting everyone in the room. "Why do you fight like that? Why do you never retreat, never surrender, never accept reasonable losses?" Young Sik looked directly at the Valdorian student. "Because we have learned something that other species have not yet discovered. War is not about tactics or strategy or superior technology. War is about what you are willing to sacrifice for the things you believe in. But you sacrifice everything," Bora said. "You fight as if losing means the end of the world, Because for us, Young Sik replied simply, it does. When humans fight, we are not fighting for territory or resources or strategic advantage. We are fighting for the right of our children to exist in a universe where civilization means something. The human historian gestured to the screen, which now showed images of the Geneva Conventions, the rules of war that humans had created for themselves. These rules exist because my species learned something terrible about ourselves very early in our development. We discovered that we are capable of fighting with such intensity that we can destroy not just our enemies, but the very concept of civilized behavior. He paused, letting this statement sink in before continuing. The Geneva Conventions are not rules we created to limit our enemies. They are rules we created to limit ourselves. Because without those rules, human warfare becomes something that threatens the stability of civilization itself. Young Sik looked around the auditorium, making eye contact with as many students as possible. Your species ban humans from combat, competition for the same reason that we ban ourselves from using certain weapons or tactics, not because we cannot use them, but because once we start, we cannot stop. The implications of this statement hit the students like a physical blow. Everything they had assumed about human weakness was not just wrong, it was the exact opposite of the truth. The human student in your academy, Young Sik continued, has been trained from childhood to control the same instincts you saw in that footage. When he refuses your challenges to fight, it is not because he is afraid of losing. It is because he is afraid of what might happen if he wins. Commander Dongmin returned to the podium as Young Sik stepped aside. This is why the ban exists, the commander said. Not to protect humans from other species, but to protect other species from what? The days following the presentation passed in an uncomfortable silence. Students moved through their daily routines like people recovering from a serious illness. Conversations that had once been loud and boisterous now took place in hushed tones. The dining hall, which had always buzzed with energy and laughter, felt more like a library. Bora watched her fellow students with growing concern. Many of them seemed unable to process what they had learned about human military capability. Some appeared frightened, jumping at sudden noises or avoiding areas where Wu Jin might be present. Others looked confused, as if the footage had challenged their basic understanding of how the universe worked. Taeho had been hit the hardest. The massive Valdorian student, who had once dominated every conversation with his loud opinions and aggressive confidence, now sat silently during meals. His red eyes, which had blazed with arrogance just days before, remained dim and unfocused. He had not spoken a single word since leaving the auditorium. On the third day after the presentation, Bora found Wu Jin in his usual training spot. The human was practicing the same careful, controlled exercises she had watched him perform for weeks. But now she understood what she was seeing. Every movement was designed not just to build strength and skill, but to maintain discipline and self-control. May I join you? She asked. Wu Jin paused in his routine and looked at her. There was something different in his expression now, not wariness exactly, but a careful attention that had not been there before. If you wish, he replied, though I should warn you that my training methods may seem intense for other species. Bora settled into a meditation position nearby, her crystal form catching and reflecting the training room lights. I attended the presentation, she said. Wu Jin nodded, but did not stop his exercises. I assumed you would. Most students signed the petition. Are you angry that we forced this situation? She asked. That we made the Academy show footage you clearly did not want anyone to see? Wu Jin completed a complex series of movements before answering. Anger serves no purpose. You made choices based on the information you had available. Now you have more complete information. Is that how you see everything? As information to be processed rather than emotions to be felt? For the first time, since she had known him, Wu Jin smiled. It was a sad expression that made Bora's crystal form resonate with sympathy. I feel emotions just like any other species, he said, but I have been taught from childhood that emotions must be controlled, especially the dangerous ones. What emotions are dangerous? Wu Jin stopped his exercises entirely and turned to face her. The ones you saw in that footage. Pride that refuses to accept defeat. loyalty that values others' lives more than your own, determination that sees surrender as worse than death. Bora considered this carefully. Those sound like noble emotions, not dangerous ones. They are both, Wu Jin replied. The same emotions that make humans willing to die to protect innocent civilians also make us willing to fight until entire civilizations are destroyed. The footage you saw represents humans at our most controlled and disciplined. You do not want to see what we become when those controls fail. Over the following days, the atmosphere at the academy began to change in subtle ways. Students who had once approached Wu Jin with mockery or challenges now gave him respectful distance, not fearful distance, something closer to the respect that soldiers show to decorated veterans. Instructor Hyun Soo modified his combat training classes to include more discussion about rules of engagement and the importance of proportional response. He never mentioned humans directly, but everyone understood the context of these lessons. Restraint in combat, he explained to his students, is not a sign of weakness. It is evidence of discipline and civilized thinking. Any species can learn to fight. Only the most advanced species learn when not to fight. A week after the presentation, Sung Ho approached Wu Jin in the equipment room after training. The KVAC student's metallic features made it difficult to read his emotions, but his voice carried clear respect. I owe you an apology, Sung Ho said. We all do. We thought your restraint was cowardice. Wu Jin finished storing his training equipment before responding. You reacted based on the behavior you observed. Most species interpret caution as fear, because that is how caution works for them. But not for humans. For humans, caution is often about protecting others from what we might do if we lose control. We have learned that our first instincts in conflict situations are not always compatible with civilized behavior. Sung Ho was quiet for a moment, processing this explanation. The presentation showed humans fighting to protect alien civilians. Your species risks death to save people who are not even related to you. Yes, Wu Jin agreed simply. Why? Wu Jin looked at the KVAC student with an expression that was both patient and infinitely sad. Because if we do not protect innocent life whenever we encounter it, we lose the right to call ourselves civilized. And without civilization, humans become something that the galaxy cannot coexist with. The most dramatic change came from Taeho. 2 weeks after the presentation, the Valdorian student finally approached Wu Jin. It happened in the dining hall during the evening meal, when most students were present to witness the encounter. Taeho walked slowly across the hall, his massive frame moving with uncharacteristic hesitation. When he reached Wu Jin's table, he stopped and stood silently for several seconds. The entire dining hall grew quiet, waiting to see what would happen. I challenged you repeatedly, Taeho said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. I called you weak and mocked your restraint. I tried to provoke you into fighting me. Wu Jin looked up from his meal. Yes, you did. If you had accepted my challenges, what would have happened? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone in the dining hall was listening, but no one dared to breathe loudly enough to interrupt the conversation. Wu Jin set down his eating utensils and gave Taeho his complete attention. I would have defeated you, he said quietly. Not because I am stronger or faster, but because I would not have stopped until you could no longer continue fighting. Even though it was just a training exercise, humans have difficulty distinguishing between training and actual combat once the fighting begins, Wu Jin replied. That is why we prefer to avoid physical confrontation entirely. Taeho's red eyes flickered with understanding. The Academy rules against interspecies combat exist to protect us, not you. The rules exist to protect everyone, Wu Jin corrected, gently, including me. Fighting changes humans in ways that can be difficult to reverse. The Valdorian student stood quietly for another moment, then did something that shocked everyone present. He bowed his head in a gesture of respect that his species typically reserved for honored elders. I understand now, Taeho said. Thank you for your restraint. As Taeho returned to his own table, the dining hall gradually returned to normal conversation levels. But the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Students no longer looked at Wu Jin as someone who needed protection from combat. They looked at him as someone whose protection of them required constant effort and discipline. Bo-Ra continued training near Wu Jin, and over time she began to understand the true complexity of human military philosophy. Humans had not just learned to fight effectively, they had learned to fight so effectively that they needed to create elaborate systems to prevent themselves from going too far. "Your Geneva Conventions," she said during one of their conversations, "they are not just rules about treating enemies fairly." "No," Wu Jin agreed. "They are our attempt to remain human even during the most inhuman activity possible." "What happens to humans who fight without those rules?" Wu Jin was quiet for a long time before answering. "They win," he said finally, "but the cost of victory becomes so high that it destroys everything they were trying to protect." Months passed, and life at the academy settled into a new normal. The annual combat tournament was held as scheduled, but with modified rules that emphasized tactical skill over raw aggression. Students competed with honor and respect, understanding that true strength lay not in the ability to destroy opponents, but in the wisdom to know when destruction was necessary and when it was not. Wu Jin never participated in the tournament, but he was often invited to demonstrate training techniques and discuss military philosophy with interested students. He became not just accepted, but respected as someone who carried knowledge that could benefit all species. The petition that had started everything was quietly withdrawn, not because the students no longer wanted to compete against humans, but because they finally understood that some competitions were too dangerous to pursue. In the end, the Academy learned a lesson that would be passed down to future generations of military officers. The most dangerous warriors are not those who know how to fight, but those who understand the true cost of fighting and choose their battles accordingly. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between training sessions and classes, Wu Jin continued his careful exercises, maintaining the discipline that kept both himself and the galaxy safe from the terrible effectiveness of human warfare unleashed without restraint. The truth had been revealed, and everyone was better for knowing it, even if they would never be quite the same again.